So I've just finished reading this book, Estrogeneration, and in this video I'm going to be covering everything that I've learned from this book. And we're going to begin with the most interesting thing that I found, which was the fact that research shows, according to this book, that skin cancer is basically bullshit. Or the way it's caused is basically bullshit. So it is essentially caused from the sun, but the way it's caused is through estrogenics attaching to receptors and then being bound to the receptors via sunlight. So sunscreen contains an estrogenic. I can't quite recall exactly what estrogenic it was, but it contains an estrogenic. So when you're putting sunscreen on, you're lavishing all of these estrogenics over your body. And then obviously you're putting sunscreen on to protect you from sunlight. So then you're going out into the sun. And then the estrogenic that is within the sunscreen is binding to your estrogen receptors. And then the sunlight is like fusing the estrogenic to the estrogen receptor. And then that's where I believe the cancer comes in, because cancer is formed by a malformity within a DNA gene. I believe that was what the book said. And somehow, I can't quite remember how, but somehow the estrogenic affects the growth of the DNA gene. There was 3 factors to do with the DNA gene. It was something like cell multiplication, cell growth, and there was another one, something to do with spreading, like cells spreading. And there were 3 factors that I believe the gene was responsible for. Anyway, I can't quite recall all of that, but essentially that's that on skin cancer. So that's obviously where it's got mixed up, how people believe that the sun causes skin cancer, when in actual fact is something to do with the bond between the estrogenics and the rays of sunlight fusing those estrogenics to those receptors, and then somehow something to do with that is interfering with the DNA gene / cell development and growth. Moving on, that's the first thing I wanted to state, because that's the most interesting thing that I just learned from that book. And then I'm kind of going to go from beginning to finish in the same order that the book went. So the first thing the book started with was all the different types of estrogenics. So we have, for example, EE2, we have parabens, we have phthalates, we have 4-MBC, we have BP, we have BPA, BPS. An interesting thing about BPA as well was, so BPA is an estrogenic, and very strong research shows that it has very damaging effects on, just very damaging effects in general, right? Obviously it kills testosterone. It's an estrogenic, which if you know what estrogenics are, then you know they're very harmful. And BPA has been banned. I believe it was banned in Europe and been banned in many other countries. The only country that really doesn't ban a lot of these estrogenics is the US, which is what was emphasized in this book, is how bad it is in the US. It's way worse than many other countries. But the BPA has many other variants, essentially, that have a very similar chemical structure and therefore produce very similar harmful effects. They're just very slightly different. And so the BPA has been banned in all of these countries, but what people are doing, especially when you see like BPA free products, for example, and you think, oh yeah, that's fine, that's BPA free, oh, this country's good because they banned BPA. But there's BPS and there's other forms of BP, for example H. I don't know if that's real, but I'm just giving you an example. But BPS is definitely real, and it essentially produces the exact same harmful effects. And so in these products that don't contain BPA, they're just using something such as BPS to replace it, to do what the BPA should have done. But obviously they can't use the BPA, so they're using BPS instead, which produces the exact same negative effects. And this is because a realization I had, this whole idea about the Matrix and that they're out to kill us. The intention of this, of things such as this, as using BPS because they can't use BPA, which shows they don't care about the negative effects that it's having on people, but they're not doing it intentionally to harm us. They're doing it for profit. Everything is driven by profit, and that's why they're doing this stuff. This is why the idea that the Matrix is doing it to hurt you, they're doing the things that they're doing to hurt us, is false. They're not doing it to directly hurt us. They're doing it all for profit, for their own profit. And that also makes me think about how this book mentioned studies are completely fucked. You can pretty much find a study to support any narrative or any opinion that you want, because what these very rich companies will do, like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, all of these top-end companies that have loads of money, is they will sponsor the studies that support them, essentially. There's this thing called conflict of interest, and essentially what it means is that if there's someone sponsoring a study and the study is going to support them, as in somehow it's going to make them profit, then that study has a conflict of interest. So for example, if Coca-Cola supported a study that explained sugar had some health benefits, that would be a conflict of interest, because in the broader scheme of things, if all of a sudden a study comes out saying sugar increases testosterone, then people are going to be more likely to buy Coca-Cola because it's full of sugar. So this is why you have to be very careful with studies. You also have to understand the variables within studies. So if someone wants to push a certain narrative, they're gonna say that they tested on subjects with a certain diet, for example, but they're not gonna control all the other possible variables, which makes it very hard to know whether what they're testing is actually true. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but studies are you can't trust studies basically in the modern day, because they're very manipulated towards profit. For example, all the recent fad diets are all for profit. The low carb diet, the keto diet, yes, some of them work, but the fact is, and that's an example of why the intention of these massive companies and all these people isn't to harm us, it's just for their profit. And that's an example, because the keto diet works and it's way healthier than the average diet, but the only reason the keto diet has been pushed is because it's for profit, which you can argue necessarily ain't a bad thing, but obviously the intention that is for profit is bad, because they'll just as willingly push a narrative in the opposite direction, a diet that is extremely unhealthy. So that's a massive problem. The next most interesting thing that I found in this book was the animal studies. They are fucking insane. Firstly, estrogenics are everywhere. There's no way that you are not going to encounter estrogenics now. It's impossible, because there was a study done, I believe it was alligators in Australia, and just completely in the wild, estrogenics in them. All the other studies done on animals, all in the wild, estrogenics in every single one. So it's technically, essentially impossible to avoid estrogenics now. You can't do it. Now, the animal study that was very surprising was, well, they were all very surprising, but the one that I can think of off the top of my head was whitefish. I can't remember what country it was. It was a lake in a certain country, and it was a study done on little white fish, and they tested the levels of EE2, I believe it was, and the levels of EE2 were extremely high. And then in relation with that, there was also a study done on the effects that the EE2, which I'm not sure if I said is an estrogenic, the effects that EE2 had on the white fish. And I may be wrong, but I do believe that the effects were the a dysfunction in reproductive organs. So that's what EE2 did to the white fish. And then there's many other animal studies where they've tested the effects of estrogenics on these animals. For example, frogs, turtles. They did a study on turtles. They did studies on so many animals. I just can't think of any off the top of my head right now, where the estrogenics caused an effect on the reproductive systems. They caused the reproductive systems to just dysfunction, not work. They caused gonad malformations. So a certain level of estrogenics within animals were causing literally their privates to not develop properly. So this is all leading to, obviously, infertility is going to become common soon, because if you look at the statistics, our testosterone levels are dropping and we're becoming less and less and less infertile. So all of these studies kind of point towards that, because all of the estrogenics have negative effects on reproductive systems, private formations and development, sexual organ formations and development, and all of this stuff. So that kind of intertwines with the fact that human fertility levels are dropping at a rapid rate also. And a very, very devastating fact also that was in this book was that, I can't remember the specific term that he used, but essentially when we as humans are taking in these estrogenics, the negative effects of the estrogenics are passing on to generations. So an example they used in the book was that they tested on animals, and they saw that when animals consumed estrogenics, the third or the fourth generation was still experiencing the negative effects that the estrogenics produced in the first generation. And that's even if the fourth or third generation of that species has no contact with estrogenics in their personal experience, but just the first person, because he had contact with estrogenics, that's passed on. And he actually predicted in that book that soon, as in tens of years, that would be one of the most popular subjects within science, is the fact that estrogenics pass on their negative effects throughout generations. So the animal studies were definitely the most interesting part, I would say, of that book. It's kind of annoying that I can't think of the specific ones off the top of my head, but so be it. Yeah, so I definitely recommend reading it if you're interested in estrogenics. because it's very shocking how many estrogenics are in all of our products. Because a lot of people, when you talk about estrogenics, they assume that you're talking about food, processed foods, and all of this kind of stuff. But BPA is in plastic. And I believe it's in the most commonly used plastic. Phthalates and parabens, I also believe, are in plastic. And you go into a supermarket and the packaging for everything is, you guessed it, plastic. And just all of these healthcare products like sunscreen, your hair conditioning, your shampoo, your toothpaste, your toothbrush, your everything you use, your coffee mug is probably lined with BPA. The baked beans that you eat, the tin that the baked beans are in is lined with BPA, let alone the amount of estrogenics the baked beans themselves have in them. And not to mention the herbicides and that are sprayed all over our crops for God knows why. But yeah, for example, atrazine, that's a specific example, is sprayed all over our crops, and there were studies done on atrazine. I can't remember what the negative effects were, but the negative effects were very severe, and it showed somewhere in this book the effects of atrazine on animals, because obviously we can't study the effects on humans so much, because I don't think any human's going to opt in to do a study on a herbicide that they believe fucks up your genitals. So yeah. And also, if you're within the niche of like self-improvement, estrogenics, the matrix, all that kind of stuff, then you've probably heard that cow's milk is full of estrogen, which it is. And the reason this is because of selective breeding. So what has happened is, over the course of many years, due to selective breeding, the pregnancy of cows has got to the point where it's extended for a much longer period than what it should be. So for example, let's say it should last 30 days, now it lasts 120 days. And the milk during pregnancy is full of estrogen. So now there's a much longer time period of which the farmers are collecting the cow's milk, which is heavy in estrogen, and then this is getting spread out through all the milk that we drink just in general. So that's why cow's milk is full of estrogen. And again, pointing back to the point that that's not intentional to harm us, that's just I mean, if anything, it was well, actually I don't know why they did selective breeding, so I can't say that, but it's unlikely that that was intentional to harm us, so more so for profit. And then there was another thing, yes, so if you believe in God and you believe in the Bible, it says in the Bible that we should eat bread. And then obviously a lot of people will say, well, look at how unhealthy bread is today. So that's a case where the Bible is wrong. But 2,000 years ago, bread was, I can't say for sure, but I'm assuming it was very healthy. And what's happened is, again, due to selective breeding, we've bred these plants in a way so that they withstand certain environments, so that they grow for longer, so that they grow in bigger quantities. And we've used all kinds of different methods to do this, which over the course of 2,000 years has caused these breads to become more and more unhealthy. And then of course you have to also consider the amount of chemicals that are being used to make the breads compared to what they used to make the bread 2,000 years ago. See if I can think of anything else that might come to head that I've learned from this book. There is also a website where you can buy tons of estrogenic free products as well, so if you are still hanging in there and you are interested in that, then let me know and I'll put it in the comments. One interesting thing was the way that, so atrazine, the herbicide that I mentioned earlier, was one of the ways of which it gets into our water system, which was obviously it gets sprayed on the crops, and then, I mean, it explained it in the book as if once it gets sprayed on the crops, it goes to the ground, and then from the ground it gets to the water. So I don't know if that's because it's falling through the ground or sliding along the ground, however it is, but I assume it's falling through the ground and then reaching the water below the ground. And that's how the book essentially put it. And then obviously that's going into our water. And so this is why I personally ain't a massive promoter of fish in my diet. Obviously fish is extremely healthy. It's so good. It's got omega-3, I'm pretty sure it's omega-3 fats in it. Good for the brain, good source of protein, etc. Everything about it is healthy. The only bad thing now is because water, the ocean, the rivers, the lakes, everything is one of the most heavily estrogenic sources right now. So the fish are swimming in all these estrogenics all day, every day. So they're going to be covered in estrogenics, which is one of the reasons that, as I said, I'm not a massive promoter of fish for increasing testosterone or just a healthy diet in general. And just to finish this off, I'm sure if I was to sit here for an hour, more things would pop to my head, but I'm not too keen on doing that. So just to finish things off, what was I going to say? Yes, that was it. I reckon we're going to see the effects of these estrogenics within the next 50 years. We're going to see like some very harmful effects manifesting from the estrogenic consumption today. Not to mention that I'm pretty sure the infertility studies, where the infertility is going to hit us a bit sooner than that. So that was yeah, but we'll see. Time will tell.